I'll introduce one of my longtime friends and moderators of Rune Secrets Discord channel, Jared Kylef. How are you doing?
How am I doing? You know, considering how strange the world has been for the last few months, I'd say I'm doing pretty well.
Yeah, well, I am doing well as well. So, I'm known as Tyrael. I wrote the Book of Rune Secrets. I run runesecrets.com, and that's been 12 years going. Now we're starting this podcast. Rough start. Actually, the first couple was an interview with Kim Wilborn, and she was doing her own podcast. So it was like I borrowed my portion of her telesummit to springboard this, to launch this thing. But hopefully it's going to be to study the runes.
You know, my introduction to the runes was through a video game of all things, through that Lord British's Ultima series of games, and I originally didn't know that they had any meaning at all. I just thought that they were, you know, some made up characters, you know?
Yeah, me too. And it was Anglo-Saxon characters that he used in that video game. And I didn't have the manual. I had to decode them all by myself into what they meant. And the ones that represented 2 letters, not 1, confused me to no end. I was, 10 years old and trying to figure out the runes, not realizing what I was doing at all. Great fun.
Right, I was in the same boat myself. I'm not terribly proud to admit it, but I didn't have any money to buy games when I was that age, 10 years old and all that kind of stuff. So I, uh, I had copies of games, a little Ultima 4 disc, and when those characters appeared on signs and things that I saw, I was just fascinated by it. I was like, what am I even looking at? Uh, Not realizing that there was, of course, a deeper meaning. Of course, the ones in those games, they're a little bit off from the real thing, but they're at least relatively close.
They had to put them on a kind of an 8-bit system. Well, Commodore 64 was like 64K, but it was still 8-bit, wasn't it? Anyway, this is
Yep.
this is
Slightly off
outside
topic.
indulging my geek side, webmaster / fiddling with all the code behind Rune Secrets and whatnot. So a video game, and Lord British is still around and kicking. I learned some music, and Jared learned some music as well. And we made some music for his most recent video game, Shroud of the Avatar, which also has runes in it.
Yeah, it's pretty fun stuff. But what I really do want to do is spend some time, learning a little bit about the runes and what they mean, because quite honestly, you and I have been friends for a long time, and I haven't, although I've looked at them kind of in a passively, I haven't really taken the time to dig in, and it seems like that'd be a smart thing for me to do, which is why I agreed to come on this podcast with you, because I think it'd be a good thing for me,
Well, it's great, and also I've never taken the time to explain it to one of my friends because I thought it was kind of like a weird thing that only I was interested in. So we're coming at it from 2 completely different angles. Like I have never explained this to someone who I knew personally, closely, who had no prior experience. When people visit my site, runesecrets.com, they get there usually via Google, and Google has these weird search terms that are the rune names, and I rank very highly on those names because they're so niche, they're very obscure, they're not English, so you've got a name like Novice, and that's one of the names of the runes, and it means need or need fire. When you type that into Google, you're gonna get runesecrets.com. Usually, Google's little algorithm goes up and down. So people come to me and my work with like at least a little bit of, they're coming from somewhere. So I've never really connected with someone who wasn't really coming with somewhere. Like, so it's hard to know where to start.
Right. What are people usually looking for? I mean, when they come to you, and they find your site and they come in and they ask questions. What are they? I mean, what are people usually seeking? What are they trying to get out of the runes? I mean, odds are, um, realistically, odds are, someone who comes with some knowledge at least has an idea of what they're looking for. At least thinks they know what they're looking for. As opposed to me, I'm kind of like, I don't know. You know what I mean?
I don't even know what to search. Um, it's primarily, I think, divination, either interpreting the runes for themselves or interpreting them for others, like reading, like the tarot kind of. And a lot of people come from the tarot and get into runes and try to use them like that they use the tarot. So they will take one of these symbols which have meanings, and there's 24 of them in the Elder Futhark, which is the oldest kind of rows of these runes, and they need to know what that rune means in combination with other runes often enough. Say to know someone's past and present and future. They're trying to gain information about destiny.
Now, um, you know me pretty darn well, so you know that my patron saint is Spock, right? So I tend to I tend to focus on the stuff that I can see and quantify and understand. And of course, I understand that there's more than I can see, quantify, and understand. But for the most part, my brain tends to focus on what's right in front of me. So, um, being that, being as I am, how do you think I should approach this?
Well, what I would recommend to someone who is getting into the runes was actually a common practice nowadays and a common practice apparently almost 2,000 years ago, where Tacitus documents it in Germania for the Roman Empire that the barbarian peoples are inscribing these onto cut up branches or stones or whatever and throwing them around. So the runes, you put them or buy a set off the internet. Nowadays, you can do that as well. You can make your own set on pieces of wood or smooth stones from the beach, and put one rune on each stone, and then you have a set of 24. And this is kind of like your sacred meditation or contemplation set. You will use it in various ways to gain familiarity with the meanings of the runes, which in my teachings are very, very important, because when you've done learning the meanings of the runes, you're not going to need to use them for divination as much. You're not going to need to consult my site as much. The whole point is that these meanings have philosophical values, like the virtues in Lord British's game, and it's probably why he chose the runes. Was because they represent things like various ancient gods that have uh, ideas like fertility or justice behind them, or courage, or knowledge, or journeys, or this kind of archetypal naming or representation. Once you have your rune stones or wooden runes, I actually do recommend that you play around with them, get a good feel of them, draw one out of a bag, and sit and ponder it. Say, what does this actually mean? A lot of people will ask a question to the bag, and then get one of these runes seemingly at random. And then it turns out that the meaning has something to do with their life. Now, this is no coincidence. I don't know if it's magic or fate. It's just that the way that we've organized the stories and the meanings are so archetypal that they always touch on something to do with what's going on in our lives. And there's only 24 of them, but they represent like the totality of human experience.
So that's interesting. I mean, being an avid D&D player, I often take some dice and roll some dice to find out what the outcome of a particular thing that I'm trying to do is. Um, this, but I ascribe that to randomness. I'm rolling some dice and I get a number. I don't know what the number is going to be. I suppose that makes a certain degree of sense. Being the realist that I am, I wouldn't think, oh, I'm going to reach into this bag and it's, the force or whatever it is going to magically give me the rune that makes sense. But often I think that understanding, and it sounds like this is a lot what you're telling me here, is that understanding each of them is a concept, each of them has a meaning, a way to think, a way to understand things, maybe even a way to behave, code of conduct. I don't know. Like I said, I'm pretty far on the outside of this. I don't have a lot of understanding, but from what you're telling me, is it sounds like almost like, what am I trying to say? Like they're kind of a guide to life to a certain extent. Am I taking this the wrong way?
That's right. No, I would say that you've got it. A code of conduct for sure. Gateway into wisdom, personal power, spiritual growth. And the divination is actually kind of a decoy. It gets you playing with them, gets you thinking about it while you absorb these greater things. Like you said, like, you're a tangible kind of person. You want something in front of you. Well, we're all kind of like that. It's hard to grab a concept like justice and play with it. Like justice is a big thing. What is justice? Like, how are you going to discuss that with someone necessarily? Well, with the runes, you can discuss it in the context of two people having a conversation, and they pull out this rune, Tiwaz, which means essentially justice, God tier. And then you can say, well, how does this relate to our life right now? What's going on in your life or my life or between us that would have to do with justice or sacrifice? Because some of these gods, like Tu, go way back, and Tu turns into kind of like the god Tyr from the Old Norse. And Tyr is the one that puts his hand in the mouth of the wolf Fenris to promise the wolf that they'd let him go once they bind him. Except they don't let him go because he's trying to swallow the universe. So Fenris actually eats the hand, bites off the hand of the god of justice, who's supposed to keep his promises and stuff. But it was more of the greater good that was being served in that case, right? So you have these conversations now that you can wonder at and debate or ponder alone. That.
Well, it sounds like just knowing the meaning of the rune, like, oh yeah, this is the justice. Say, what was the name of that one?
Tiwaz. It's like a little arrow pointing up.
So, but like, just knowing that doesn't really tell you something. So it sounds like you really have to spend time understanding what the rune is, and then all of the history behind it and all of the mythology behind it and all of that kind of stuff, and then how that affects you today or life today before it really starts to have meaning, before you can like actualize it and use it for yourself. At least am I once again I ask, am I kind of on target here or am I off target?
Well, a lot of people would agree with that, and there's a lot of authors who have written a lot of books capitalizing on that notion as well. I've written one book so far. There's authors who've written, dozens of books on the subject of the histories, the myths, the archaeological evidence, the esoteric meanings, etc. The other day I created a page which had the symbol, its literal meaning, and one word, one keyword that I thought best represented it as a concept. And I sent that out to my newsletter. In fact, that's a free resource if you sign up to newsletter.runesecrets.com or click on any of the newsletter links with your email address. It'll send you that resource. It's just a little graphic, but that helps you dive right in without needing to know all that stuff. I mean, you learn it eventually as your interest waxes and wanes, but you don't need to. Like, it's like learning your alphabet, right? Or numbers when you're a child. Like, so yeah, set theory is well and good, but you don't need it to count to 10. And I think the runes work the same way. Just as when we were children, we learned to decipher them in a video game. We didn't need to know anything about them, and yet they had kind of an impact on our lives to the degree in which we were interested in them.
And I think that's kind of the direction I'm driving at here, right? Um, Being practical, as you know I am, any of this really does you any good unless it can affect your life, your daily life, your long-term plans, all of that kind of stuff. Uh, so, that's the kind of thing that I'm interested in understanding. How can this affect my daily life?
Right. Well, any philosophy, really, life philosophy, has to kind of work while you're doing the dishes or managing a global pandemic or improving your relationships, or bringing that renewed feeling into everyday life that we are always looking for, whether we call it happiness or zest or adventure. Um, if it doesn't, then it doesn't really work. And I've always insisted that I'm clear about what the runes mean, and I tried to avoid esoteric languages, even though there's in my notes on the site, there's some words still hanging around from my studies way back when that don't make sense out of context. Um, but I try to be clear. If you have a question, ask me, and I'll try to make it like plain language. I'm not quoting things or uh, you know using strange words when I'm talking to you now about the runes. I don't think that's necessary. So clarity is something that I think in daily life we should always be seeking. And the other thing is utility. These are tools. It's our spiritual toolkit. And if it doesn't solve
I like
problems for us,
that term a lot, spiritual toolkit.
yeah, I thought you'd like that. um, yeah, if it doesn't like fix the problems, I mean, we have many different approaches, right? We can use the hammer, we can use the drill, we can use the awl, we can use the scraper, the skinning knife, or whatever, the scissors. But uh, ultimately, that toolkit has to contain the things we need to solve our daily problems. But we have a lot of daily problems that we don't realize. Um, there's a lot going on in the context of your learning the runes. A lot going on with your own life, relationships with wife, children, jobs, but you've also got civilizations. Civilization itself is being rocked by this huge thing right now, and like we're keeping our cool and everything, but like it is going to affect us. We need to use our toolkit to figure it out, or we've already figured it out with our toolkit. But one way or the other, there's other people that we love and care for are going to need to have their problems solved. So we're going to still need to continually approach life in a sense of like, okay, now I'm going to have to get better at something, even if it's getting better for someone else.
Yeah, this certainly is a what I would call a time of great need. There's, as you just mentioned, there's a lot more going on in many people's lives than you know. And I'm not saying that people don't normally have things going on, but I mean just in general, with all of the craziness going on in the world right now, with the COVID-19 pandemic and just the craziest politics that I've seen in my lifetime. And I mean, there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of things that people are worried about. Um, and having something to help stabilize that certainly sounds like something I'd be interested in.
Yeah, there's a lot of things to worry about, and that's a term that I've used for that is disintegration. It's not my term, but it's a term that I've thought of and that sticks in the world. Things are disintegrating, but there's a revitalization happening as well, like an integration, and that's while the old systems fall away and make a huge ruckus while they do so. And we see that like maybe the things we were concentrating on, like a 2-hour commute to work for a 15-minute meeting at a wage that we didn't agree to in the first place and can't support us, you know, maybe we're reevaluating that now while we have time with our family and can look at our priorities differently. Well, that's a revitalization of something good with a disintegration of something that we thought maybe was good. A job in the big city, like lots of work. I've got a boss. I'm looking for that promotion. Now a lot of us have to stay home, like in Canada, Ontario. Um, there's no working happening really. Like there's frontline people, but they're really trying to keep people indoors and 6 feet apart from each other, things like that. So what I'm trying to say here is that while things change and seem bad, and they can seem really bad, it's harder sometimes to see the overarching narrative of the greater good, which is like universal justice, like Tyr putting his hand in the mouth of the wolf that's threatening to devour the universe and tricking it in a way with his own honor. The wolf trusts Tyr to be foolish enough to keep his word to a raving animal thing, monster, he trusts a god to be what he appears to be. And yet, the god of justice chooses the greater good rather than what is just to the promise that he's made to this disintegrating monster. So, there's no good without bad, and no bad without good. It simply is. And that's what I try to bring to at least my interpretations and rune meanings. There should be something I mentioned that when people do divination, sometimes they'll get a rune upside down or face down or something, and they call those merc staves, or just reversed runes. And a lot of time they're interpreted as like the negative of the meaning. So like if the arrow of Tiwaz was pointing down, you'd have something, maybe it represents injustice, or an unwillingness to sacrifice. But that's one way of doing it. But in my system, it's more like the dark is and the light is inseparable. the shadow like is caused by the light. You know, there's a wholeness to each rune where you cause a problem by using that rune that another rune has to solve. So if you use the force of a rune called Thurizaz to solve some conflict, well then you may need the words and the actions and the diplomacy of other runes um, later to solve the problems that the conflict made. You know?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, it's although to be honest, and this is just me, I would be I would be I would question the method that you talked about where you pull something out of a bag and it's well it's happens to I happen to pull it out upside down or face down and well that means the opposite because there's so much chance involved in that. uh, I think that would lean against the way that I think. Not that I'm saying that other people can't think that way, but for me personally, I don't think I would feel comfortable with that.